Hey, Tim Schetz here again with C4D Training. Today I have a little tutorial showing you how to create a scene in Cinema 4D, and then we're going to create some lights that are going to fly through our scenes. And then we're going to take that into After Effects, and the lights that we created in Cinema 4D are actually going to be used as emitters for Trapcode's Particular. So we're going to do that with external compositing tags, and object buffers. So I'm going to show you kind of an advanced version that I put together, and then I'll show you how to do the basic setup yourself. Pretty cool, huh? All done just with Cinema 4D and After Effects. In order to do what we need to do with this tutorial, we're going to have a special plugin from Maxon. It's free, so if you just come here to the Maxon website at maxon.net, click on Downloads, Updates, Plugins, and then where it says Adobe After Effects, you want the plugin for After Effects CS3 to Cinema 4D connection. So you just go ahead and download that, and once you have it downloaded, you'll load it into the Adobe After Effects Support Files Plugins folder. As you see, here it is right here, Cinema 4D AE.AEX. And again, that will enable you to import the compositions that Cinema 4D outputs for this project. Alright, so let's get started making a simple version of what I just showed you. So we'll start off by adding a plane. I'm going to go ahead to my top view and just make this plane rather big. Go back to our perspective view, there we go. And then let's go ahead and add some cubes. So there's my first cube for my building. Make him a little bit narrower, a bit taller, and move him up here. There we go. There's building one. So I'm going to hold Control and drag my cube to duplicate it, and pull my second building over here, and hold Control and drag the cube again to make my third building. There we go. So bring him back in Z space a little bit. There we go. So if I look at my top view, I've got three buildings. Got building in the back, and then a building here, and a building here. So now we have a straight path for our asteroid to go through. So go back to our perspective view here. I'm going to go ahead and set this up for our camera. I'm going to get all of our buildings in view so we can clearly see the asteroid coming through behind them. So I'm going to go ahead and add a camera to my scene, since I have a view that I really like there. And I'm going to go ahead and add a light that we'll use for our meteor. Bring this guy up. And I'm going to go ahead to the top view here and get him positioned about where I want him. There we go. And go back to my front view. Bring him up just a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and bring our time indicator back here to the beginning and make sure our light is selected and keyframe it. Then bring our indicator down to frame 90, and we're going to move our light over, and I'll go ahead and bring them down because we want it to crash into the city, and go ahead and keyframe it. So now if I switch back to my perspective view, we have our meteor going between our buildings. A little slow for a meteor, I think. So we're going to go ahead and bring our end keyframe in quite a bit. Bring it about there. Bring our first keyframe in. So now if we rewind that and play, the meteor goes pretty fast. There we go. And on my first keyframe here, I'm going to go ahead and move that a little bit further to the right so it's out of scene when we start. There we go. So now we don't see it sitting there. I don't know of any meteors that hang out and just, sit there. So there's our meteor. since we're going to be using our light as an emitter for Particular in After Effects, I have to rename my light emitter, and I also have to add a Cinema 4D tag, and we're going to add an external compositing tag here, which you can't really see. So that's under, if you right click on emitter, go to Cinema 4D tags, they're in alphabetical order, and you'll go to external compositing. So that will export the 3D data for that light to After Effects after we change some settings in our rendering. So in order to have our meteor or our particles go behind our buildings, we have to add our buildings to what's called an object buffer, and that will render out an alpha channel that we can then use in After Effects to block the particles so they look like they're going behind the buildings. So I'm going to go ahead and select my buildings, and we're going to go ahead and right click, and I'm going to go to Cinema 4D tags, and let me go ahead and make this a little wider here for a second. So we're going to right click, go to Cinema 4D tags, and we're going to go to compositing, and here we have this tab in our compositing tag. It says object buffer, and we're going to go ahead, and since we have them both selected, we can just hit enable. We're going to add them both to object buffer 1, so that way they're part of the same object buffer or same alpha channel. So as the meteor goes behind them, it'll cut them both out or block the particles from behind both of them. So while we're thinking about it, let's go ahead and make our render setting changes. So I'm going to click on the render setting button, and under the general tab we want to make sure that we have full render. Under output, I'm going to go ahead and select film and video and NTSC D1 widescreen square pixel, and we want to make sure here under frame range that we select all frames. Then under save, we need to make sure that we enter a path. So I'm going to save it here in my asteroid folder. And I'm going to go ahead and output this as a QuickTime movie. And under this compositing project file section here, we want to click on save, make sure it's set to After Effects, select relative, and include 3D data. So this will output a special file for After Effects called an AEC, so it's an After Effects composition file, and it will contain all of our 3D data and all of the files that we need to use this in After Effects with Particular. Okay, so we have a couple more things to change here. So under anti-aliasing, we want to change the default setting of geometry to best because we want our image to look good. And under multipass, we need to go ahead and add multipass object buffer, because remember we added our buildings that we want to have the asteroid go behind to object buffer 1. So now we actually have to tell Cinema 4D to render that off. So here's our group ID 1. That's the one that we had set them to. If we had selected multiple group IDs, they would be showing up here, or we could add them. And then under multipass, notice that it's not automatically turned on. We have to go ahead and check that to make sure that it is rendered. Then under separate lights, we want to make sure that it's set to all. And what that will do is that'll separate out the lights, the diffuse, specular, and shadow. It'll separate it out into different movies, so then we can bring those into After Effects and adjust that if we need to. Then we have to go back to the Save tab, because now this multipass image section has been added to our Save section, and we want to make sure that that says Save, and we actually have to set a path for this as well. So this will be our object buffer movie. So go ahead and click that and say, I'm going to say buffer, save, and instead of a Photoshop, I'm going to go ahead and make it a QuickTime movie, which is all the way down at the bottom. You can't see here, but select the QuickTime movie. And that should do it for everything we need in the render settings. So I'm going to go ahead and close that. And then before we can render this, we need to add our 2 cubes to our object buffer. So we're going to select our 2 cubes in the front. we're going to right click, go to Cinema 4D tags, and again, alphabetical order, we're going to compositing. So this is an external compositing, and these are just regular compositing. And you can see it looks like a little clapboard. So we're going to go ahead and click on the two of them, and down here where it says Object Buffer in the Attributes Manager, we're going to click on Enable Buffer 1. And so again, we have our emitter, which is actually just a light that we've renamed emitter, has an external compositing tag on it, and then our two cubes that we want it to pass behind each have a compositing tag on them. Okay, now we can go ahead and set this to render. So we'll go ahead and click and select Render to Picture Viewer. And that will go ahead and render that off. Okay, now that it's done rendering, we can go ahead and switch over to After Effects. Okay, so here we are in After Effects, and just so you guys know, I'm using After Effects CS3. This will also work in CS4. I'm going to go ahead and come up here to File, Import, File, and here's my asteroid folder. So here's this asteroid.aec. So this is the file that is created by Cinema that includes the composition information, the 3D data, etc. And this is what we needed that plugin for. So I'm going to go ahead and select that and hit Open. And you'll see here that it brings in 3 folders. So we have our Cinema 4D composition. We open that. There's the composition with the movie. And with solids, which is just for our emitter. And then we have our special passes, which is our buffer object 1 movie. And that's the thing that's going to knock out the buildings so that we can have the asteroid pass behind them. So we're going to go ahead and double click on the Cinema 4D composition. And you can see this motion path here. That's our emitter or our asteroid. And as I scrub through, you can see it goes through. We're going to go ahead and add a new solid. And we're going to make sure that it's comp size. Doesn't matter what color it is. Hit OK. And to that, we're going to go ahead and apply Trapcode Particular. And I'm going to spread this out here a little bit so we can see. And 2 things we're going to need to do. We need to set a preset, and then we need to change our emitter type. Because currently, by default, the emitter is set to point, and we need to set it to a light so that it recognizes the emitter. So we're going to come up here to Animation Presets, and I'm going to select Fireball 1. And now I can come down here and change my emitter type, which is default sphere, to light, and that will recognize the emitter. And so now, as I scrub through, you can see the emitter going and the fireball following the emitter. But as you can see, it's going in front of our buildings right now, and that's what our object buffer is for. So if we go back to our project window, and I'm going to take my object buffer movie, I'm going to drop it in above my black solid, which is my Trapcode. Let's go ahead and rename that. And then on this layer, we're going to go ahead and set the track mat. If that's not available, if you don't see it, you can just hit F4 and that'll cycle through your different options for this window down here. So you want to make sure it says track mat. And we're going to go ahead and say Lumimat inverted. And so now, as I scrub through, the fireball goes behind the buildings and in front of the other building. And that's really all there is to using an object buffer for this sort of a situation. Pretty cool, huh? So if we RAM preview that, so go ahead and show you what that looks like. And there goes our asteroid between our buildings. Alright, so there you have it, using an external compositing tag on a light that we've named emitter, and then using compositing tags to add our objects that we want to cut out to our object buffer so that we can then use that as a matte in After Effects so that our emitter can go behind it. Thanks so much for watching. I'm Tim Schetz with C4D Training. Stay tuned for more Cinema 4D tutorials coming out in the coming weeks and months.